So my mind works in mysterious ways that I struggle to understand most of the time. A fleeting image causes a thought to spark, and then that spark turns into a whole conversation, and then the next thing you know, I'm pacing around my room talking to myself, and then I think, aha, since I'm already talking to myself, might as well film it and then we'll see what comes of it. That is the exact same series of events that happened when I stumbled across this picture on Twitter. This is an image of Maddy Perez portrayed by Alexa Demie for the popular HBO show Euphoria. Now, if you've been living under a rock for the past 3 years, because I believe Euphoria debuted in June of 2019. I could be wrong, don't quote me on that. But it's been around for a while. But it's a show about teenagers and the way that teenagers deal with a host of different issues, such as mental health issues, anxiety, depression, assault, sex, and just basically trying to navigate their way into adulthood, or at least that's what they think that they're doing. I have seen Euphoria in its entirety probably 3 times, and I think that there are a lot of things that the show does very, very well, and there are some things that the show just falls flat. Kenny JD made a video, and her video kind of mirrored some of my sentiments or my main issues with the show. So in her video, and you should watch it, I'll link it down below because she expresses it way better than I am going to because they're her thoughts. But in the video, she was saying that she essentially didn't make it past the first episode due to a lot of the nudity in the show, and I can agree with somebody saying that because there is an unnecessary amount of nudity in the show, in my opinion. And she was saying that it begs the question, who is this show for? Spoiler alert, Sam Levinson said that it was meant for adults to portray the way that kids are nowadays, or in order for them to sympathize with teenagers nowadays. I think that there was a better way to do it, but he's a director. She was essentially saying that you either made a show about teenagers or teenagers engaged in sex, nudity of teenagers. You either made that show for teenagers, which means selling the nudity of minors to those same minors, or you did it for adults, and in that case you would be selling the nudity of minors to adults. It's something to think about. Who was this show intended for? And I think that's something that we should have in the back of our minds when we consume all forms of media. You wrote a sex scene about a child as an adult, and there's certain issues that go along with that, and I'm not saying that children or teenagers don't deserve to have themselves represented in that way. I just think that there's a better way to go about doing it. Sam created this show for adults in an effort to get them to sympathize with teenagers, for them to be aware of some of the things that they go through, and I see that, but even some of that is questionable because according to numerous reports, Gen Z is having less sex than anybody ever, so there's that. And the second point is, I don't need to know that something happens, or I don't need to see that something happens to know that it happens. And I know that that sounds problematic, but let me explain. I don't need to see people brushing their teeth in order for me to know that they are brushing their teeth. I don't need to see teenagers having sex for me to know that they're having sex. There are also ways that you can pull it off without showing the full body nudity that they did in Euphoria, and I understand some scenes. So for example, with the McKay and Cassie scene, I can see that in context. I can see that being a representation of how adult content, how it feeds into the minds of kids and teenagers, and it influences their sexual relationships and their sexual relationships with their partners. I can see all of that. I can see why scenes like that help the narrative and push the story along, and I can see that. But I don't need to see certain things with the graphics, with the explicit nature of the show. And I'm going to delve into this topic a bit more, but I think that it is ludicrous to have a show about teens in high school and not expect teens to watch the show because it is not intended for them. It doesn't work that way. Kids want to see themselves reflected in media just as bad as anybody else, especially when it comes to teenagers and their different portrayals, and how hardly anybody ever gets it right because people are trying so hard to embody what teenagers might think, that they don't know teenagers, they're not around kids. The people who are writing these shows are not around kids, so they don't know what's going on. So when a show comes out that is about kids and you market it as these are the real life experiences of kids and all of these different things, teenagers are going to watch it. A younger audience is going to watch it because you are telling their stories, and it makes sense that they want to see how their stories are going to be told. But anyways, that put a cap on that, and then we'll come back to that later. But for this video, I want to shift gears, not entirely, but I want to focus on the story of Maddy Perez and Nate Jacobs. And while we're going through this, I really want us to keep in mind, who was this show created for? So I already said that it was created for adults, but I just told you that kids are watching it at the same time. So I want us to keep that in mind, but also how real, because this show is supposed to be a real depiction, but how real do you want to be with a dramatized retelling of something? Because this is also supposed to be based on his life loosely, or the character Rue is supposed to be based on his life. So how real do we want to be in certain circumstances? So let us get into the rest of the video. Let's talk about Maddy Perez. I love Maddy Perez. Outside of her relationship with Nate, Maddy is one of my favorite characters, and I think that she appeals to a lot of people because it is the complete opposite of the female character, or the female character in high school that we've seen in such a long time. And I think it's mostly due to her hyper femininity. Maddy wears skirts, Maddy wears crop tops, Maddy wears makeup, Maddy wears like pinks and colors. And I think for so long media has pushed this whole I'm not other girl's girl on everybody else, and Maddy's not like that. Maddy knows that she doesn't want to work. Maddy knows that she wants to be taken care of, and she saw that in Nate Jacobs for certain reasons. But I think that's why a lot of people like her, and some people, we'll get into why some people hate her, like this is the next portion, but I think that she embodies what a lot of people want to say, like I don't want to work, I want to have somebody taking care of me, and I like these hyper feminine things that society looks down on me for. So that's why I really like Maddy. I don't think that Maddy is this mean girl that people paint her out to be. I think that you're pushing a lot of your own insecurities, or a lot of your own thoughts onto this character that she never thought that she was. Because I've seen some videos, or I've seen some takes, and it's like, Maddy was so horrible, Maddy was this, Maddy was that. Did we watch the same show? Because Maddy wasn't really with anybody outside of her friend group and Nate where she was this horrible person. She had a good relationship with Cassie from what I could tell. The only time where she blew up at her was when she found those images on Nate's phone, and then Cassie was talking about it, and then that was the one time. The second time was with Kat, and I need us to stop, because all of this hate for Maddy, I don't know where it is for Kat, although Kat had a whole range of issues going on. I could talk about Kat for a very, very long time. But when it comes to Maddy and Kat's relationship, the only time when Maddy was actually mean to Kat was when she called her the C word. And if I were in Maddy's position, Kat would have gotten a whole lot worse had it been me, because that was right after the time that Nate got arrested in the school. So Kat knew that Maddy was being abused at that point. I don't know if before that point in time, I don't know if anybody actually knew the extent of Nate and his actions towards Maddy. But after Nate got arrested at the school for assaulting Maddy, and Maddy was trying to get into contact with her friend, and her friend blew her off to suck dick in the back of a car. And then when she finally comes into contact with Kat, Kat throws her abuse back in her face and makes fun of her for it. I'm sorry, but Kat would have been called a lot worse by me. She's lucky that Maddy only chose to call her the C word. Like, there's context to a lot of these interactions where you guys say that Maddy is just this horrible, mean person, never to be trusted. Y'all compare her to Nate Jacobs, and she spilled some chili on Nate's predator father. Okay, what? Those are the only instances that Maddy was actually mean, and the rest was just that was just her attitude. She had like an attitude. It wasn't even bad. It's not as nearly as bad as the things that Nate Jacobs was doing. So I have a question. I need to find out why some people can't have sympathy and empathy for abuse victims unless you see them in pain all of the time, because I think that element added to it. We view Maddy as this bad bitch character, and so we trivialize all of the shit that Nate was doing to her, and we try to compare and contrast the two when there is no comparison or contrast to be made whatsoever. Two things can be true at the same time. I say this in all of my videos. If I ever have merch, that's gonna be on the merch. Two things can be true at the same time. We can talk about your perceived notion of Maddy's character and how some people think that she's toxic and the behavior that she exhibits. I, for one, think that it comes from the fact that she knew that Nate could have killed her at any moment in time, but that's just my opinion. So we can discuss that, but we can also say, hey, Nate was far worse. She was not the princess. She was not like an unflawed character. All of these characters have flaws, but to compare her to Nate Jacobs, are you kidding me? And then that took me back to the original picture, because the picture that I saw on Twitter came from TikTok, and I said, okay, I need to go to the source, because I'm going to insert the picture again, and I want you to pause the video and read some of the things that the picture says. And I'm just like, I can't believe that you all are saying this about a victim of abuse. Number one, did we watch the same show? Number two, so don't follow me on TikTok. I don't make TikToks. I'm not about to be dancing on TikTok. But I went to TikTok because I wanted to see what was going on, and I was floored and disgusted at the exact same time. The amount of people on TikTok that want to be Maddy Perez is concerning, and it actually disturbs my spirit, because it's one thing to sympathize with her. It's one thing for her experience to be a mirror of your own and you find comfort in that. It's one thing to relate to her, but wanting to be Maddy is a completely different situation. I don't want to be anybody in this show, because they all have their own issues that need to be dealt with. But when we say things like this, words have meanings. There are TikToks, edits of Maddy's and Nate's relationship, and in the caption, people are saying, I know that they're toxic, but they love each other so much. They love each other so much. I understand that a fraction of this is based on the conventional attractiveness or the traditional attractiveness of Alexa and Jacob. I understand that, but it's two different things to say that, hey, Jacob is cute, and it's a whole other story completely to be like, I want to be in a relationship with Nate Jacobs. That is the definition of romanticization. You are taking the best parts of these people. I don't know if Nate has any best parts, but portrayed best parts. You're taking the best parts of these people and you're glorifying them, and you're leaving everything else to the wayside. And when it comes to this situation, I have to look at it. I have to say, do I blame people for doing this? Or do I blame the writers for not writing this show well enough? Hear me out. This is where the question of who is this show designed for comes back into context. Because as I said before, Sam said it was intended for adult audiences, but you can't write a show about teens and then expect teenagers not to write it. So where do I place the blame? Where does this go now? Because do I place the responsibility on kids for watching a show that they weren't supposed to watch? Or do I look at the writers and the creators and do I say, hey, kids and teenagers weren't your intended audience, but you should have had the wherewithal. You should have known that kids were going to be watching this show. So now it is your due diligence. It is your job to say, hey, teenagers aren't our intended audience, but you know what? They're going to watch the show. Zendaya is in the show. Zendaya is my age, but she does appeal to a younger audience. And I know that she said that the show is intended for mature audiences, but still, some of the material in this show, most adults don't know how to deal with. So that's number one. But I feel like there should have been a meeting to say, hey, let's try to hold some people's hands when we discuss the subject matter that we're going to discuss, especially since kids are going to be watching. For example, I think they did a perfect job with Rue and the portrayal of how her drug addiction affected everybody around her. Now, I know that abuse and drug addiction are two different things, but I'm going to draw some parallels. Stay with me. When it came to Rue and her addiction, we had the aspect of her family, but I also think that Ali was such an important addition to her characterization because he wasn't somebody who was attached to her the way that her family was, but he was there and it offered a level of distance, and then we as the audience could use Ali to see things through a different perspective. Rue also had Ali to give her advice. They also did that episode, the Christmas episode, I believe, where they had their entire scene was dialogue. It was just him talking to her. So we got that. Rue had that character, and us as the audience had that character. When it came to Maddy and her character and her abuse, there was absolutely no subversion, and anytime a subtle teaching moment was introduced there, it just became trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. And I'm not saying that Ali is a perfect character. No, he's flawed, but that's what makes him so good for her and good for the story, and it makes the audience, like, we want to experience the story with him, and it's almost like we're talking to Rue through Ali. That's the feeling that his character gives. I know that I just talked about the sex scenes, but that scene in the police office where they literally handcuffed Maddy and held her down to the table and cut off her sweater was one of the most traumatizing things that I have seen in television, and I actually had to pause. Like, every time I have to skip that scene sometimes, but I understand why they did it. So this isn't me saying that uncomfortable discussions or uncomfortable situations should never be portrayed on screen. That is not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying after that scene, I came out with an interpretation of it, right? My interpretation was, hey, like, this is fucked up. Like, this is a reenactment, not literally, but this is an embodiment and the symbolization of how police and law enforcement deal with abuse victims, and Maddy was obviously traumatized. When I was scrolling through TikTok, seeing a lot of this information, a lot of it just fell back to, oh my gosh, Maddy was such a bitch and she was just being bitchy. And at that point, I'm like, these are scenes that you need to take your audience's hand and then walk them through that situation, and that could have been beneficial with an Ali to Maddy's character. I hope that I'm making sense. I think that I am, because they never brought up that scene again. That happened. that happened, and then Maddy had the other traumatizing thing, and where this school is kind of fucked up because they did that to Rue too. Like, y'all knew that she was in rehab for months before school opened. Why would you ask her how she spent her summer? That's one. Number two, they did this whole PSA abuse thing in front of all of the students, and everybody obviously knew that they were talking about Maddy. So why would they do that? Those things are subtle. And if you're giving them to an adult audience, I can see how the writers would feel, hey, we don't need to say this because it's already implied. But once again, younger kids are watching this show. And screw that, adults don't know how to navigate most of these situations either. Adults are clueless. So when we're talking about abuse, and I don't mean to hold our hand in the literal sense of holding our hand. I'm saying give us a character like Ali to Maddy, and then we can view it through that lens or something. The only person Maddy had was Nate. That's the only person, and then you just have this warped view of their relationship because through Maddy, we're seeing that she feels like he's the only one who cares about her and all of these different things. I also want to get into realism and being realistic. And also, like, I'm biting Kenny's point here, but there's only so much realism that you can portray with a scripted show. Directors, writers have the authority to change things as they see fit. And when it comes to abuse, I know that tactics of abusers is isolation. Maddy thinking that Nate is the only one who cares about her because we see how the school treated her and we see how the police force treated her. All of those things are realistic, but as I said before, when we are putting on a show like this, at what point do we introduce other elements in order to balance the realism of the show? So what happened in the police station, that was realism with a little bit of dramatization, but we can call that being a real experience. But once you just leave it there, it does nothing for the viewer but leave them with trauma. And we have enough trauma in our lifetimes, and maybe this was the intent of Sam, maybe this is his vision, but especially with a show as heavy as this, there could have been something else. Come on, we could have added somebody else to guide Maddy through this situation, but I don't know, maybe that's just me. And to all of you Nate Jacob sympathizers out there, is this who you are? Is this who you represent? Homophobic Nate, transphobic Nate, abuser Nate, revenge Nate, what he did to Jules. And some of you think that Jules is worse than Nate. Some of you think that Maddy is worse than Nate, and then when you ask why, well, she was mean while Nate is out here being a sociopathic abuser. I need it to stop. I understand our childhood experiences shape who we are, but that does not give him the right to walk around abusing people. I need you to stop. I need the victim blaming to stop when it comes to Maddy. Let's talk about Tyler, because I know that that's a big point that a lot of people try to spin about how Maddy lied about being unconscious when it came to Tyler, and that essentially led Nate to beating him up. I don't think that she should have lied. I think it's wrong that she lied. But out of all of these different analyses, are we going to pretend that Tyler wasn't a 22-year-old man at a high school party and didn't think to ask Maddy her age before they engaged in whatever the hell they engaged in, because we don't know if they had sex or not? Are we going to act like that didn't happen? Are we going to act that it wouldn't have been statutory anyways? Even if they did something? Because even when Nate beat his ass, a broken clock is right twice a day. Even when Nate beat his ass, Nate was like, this is statutory. She's 17. You're 22 at a high school party. You are a loser. Once again, do I think that it was right that she lied? No. And two things can be true at the same time. We can have that conversation about Maddy. and once again, I also think that she was scared of Nate and he might have killed her because he had this weird obsession. He had this weird obsession with purity when it came to her, a whole range of his issues. So I do think that he would have done something to her if he thought that she did something with Tyler, even though they weren't together. And also, on a tangent, this show is very, very weird because you all have this whole conversation with Nate and statutory and when he beat Tyler's ass, so there's that. But in Maddy's opening, or in her episode, in the beginning, you were like, Maddy was 14 when she slept with a 40-year-old man, but she wanted it and she was in control the entire time. What the fuck is that, Sam? What is that about? And then there was no subversion to that either. Maybe the rest of the episode was supposed to be that, but then when you paint Maddy in this light and then you have her say that, oh, I was unconscious, when we know that she wasn't unconscious. Nate knew that she wasn't unconscious too, but those are things that we have to think about. And once again, she shouldn't have lied, but Tyler was a creep and a loser. Did he deserve Nate beating him up like that? I don't know, but he was about to, given the opportunity, he would have had sex with a minor. And in the end, it wouldn't have mattered because Nate is a sociopath and Nate was going to do what Nate wanted to do, especially since he did it in conjunction with his whole convoluted plan that involved Jules. I think that whole subplot just villainized her and made her a punching bag for people who didn't like her in the first place. And I fear that in season 2, Nate will have a redemption arc for whatever reason. We don't want it. If Nate is having a redemption arc, I will while watching the episode, I might throw my device at a wall. I don't want Nate to have a redemption arc. But I feel like that is where this is heading to, and I think the reason why they probably made Maddy lie is to add context and just be like, oh, they're both horrible people, but nothing that she did was ever in comparison to the shit that Nate was doing. And I needed to stop. I need all Nate sympathizers to stop. I need people who relate to Nate. You have issues. You have issues that need to be dealt with, and they need to be dealt with a swiftness because we don't want it. We don't want it. I don't want it. And that was my video about Euphoria and about Nate and Maddy specifically. It's like 3 years late, but it was annoying. That picture really took me out of my peace, and I just started talking to myself, and I'm just like, this is completely ridiculous. But anyways, thank you for watching. If you like the video, subscribe if you want to, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.